Well, it is finally summertime, and it is time to plant the cucumbers and the cantaloupe, and that's what we're going to discuss in today's video, how you get those things growing in your garden without taking up tons of space in your garden. So stick around. Hey guys, welcome back to another Slightly Rednecked video. Again, my name is Chris. If you're not familiar with this channel, I help you to produce your own meat, eggs, and vegetables from your backyard, your balcony, your deck, your garage, or heck, even a spare room in your house if that's the way you want to do it. Today we're planting some cucumbers and some cantaloupe in the garden. Now these things are plants that usually take up a huge amount of space. They vine out, 8-9 feet sometimes. The cantaloupe's about a 3-4 foot vine, and it just grows all over the place. So it really takes up a lot of real estate in your garden unless you grow them vertically. And that's how I grow my cucumbers and cantaloupe. In fact, until recently, I didn't even realize, well, I say till recently, the way I grew up with my grandfather's gardening, I didn't even realize there was any other way to grow these things except for vertically. I didn't know people did it any other way. So here's what I've got here is a couple of my, these are tomato cages basically. These are my homemade tomato cages. These are, I think, 4-inch square welded wire, about 6 foot around. So I placed them here, drove a couple of fence posts in on either side, tied them to it so they don't blow over. And then I've just got my holes for my cucumber. This is all cucumber here, dug just around the edge here. So I'll bring you in close here. I'll show you what I do to prepare the hole, how we get the seeds planted, and then we'll go from there. All right, so hopefully this is showing up on camera. This is where I'm going to plant the cucumber here. And what I've got is I've got these little holes. I've just cleared the mulch out. And I'm just going to kind of loosen the soil up right here and amend it a little bit. And I've got these about every 4 or 5 inches, well, about every 5-6 inches all the way around. So let me show you what I do to prepare the hole. Luckily, my dirt is pretty soft. I forgot my shovel, but that's okay. I can dig with my hands here. So I just kind of dig a hole here. And then I'm going to amend it with some rabbit manure. You could use compost or whatever you want. Just throw some in there and then just kind of work it around a little bit. That's all you got to do. Loosen up the dirt, basically. That's about it. So again, I've got one of these about every 6 inches all the way around these cages. And then get my seeds out here. And then what I'm using here is a Boston pickling cucumber. These have been pretty good. Now these are fairly old seeds, a couple of years old. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plant about 4 or 5 seeds in each hole. I'm just going to put them down there and then just cover them up with a little bit of dirt, and that's about it. Now what will happen is once these things sprout, get about 6 inches tall, I'll thin it out to the strongest 2 plants, and I'll let 2 plants grow out of each hole. And then of course then I'll move the mulch back around it. Now as with any seed, when you're starting seeds, you want to keep them fairly moist and fairly damp until they sprout. Cucumbers do like a lot of water, so it's a good idea to heavily mulch them. But what I'll do is just water every single day if it doesn't rain. If it rains, don't need to water. Otherwise, water them every single day until they get sprouted, till they get up in about 2 or 3 inches tall, and then move the mulch back around them, and then I can kind of back off on the watering a little bit, keep them kind of evenly watered from that point on. Let me get the rest of these planted out here, and I'll show you a couple other things real quick. All right, so I got all my cucumber seed planted here, and again, what's going to happen when these start sprouting, I'll thin it out again when it gets about 2 or 3 inches tall, the strongest 2 plants in each hole, and they'll climb these tomato cages, and they'll fill this in pretty good, and this will be where all my cucumbers are. Now I like these cages here because they have pretty good sized squares on them, so I can reach through to grab the cucumbers and the fruit and that kind of stuff when it becomes ripe, and it's easy to get to. And this is going to get a little bit crowded in here. It'll be hard to find them, but it won't be that bad. And here's the thing I like about growing cucumbers vertically. If you were to plant these on the ground and grow them out over the ground, each vine is going to take up about 8 feet by probably 3-4 feet, something like that. So it's going to take up a huge amount of real estate in your garden. And I've got 6 holes here. I'm going to grow 2 plants in each hole. So that's 12 plants total in a 6x3 section. This is only about 6 foot wide. Actually, it's not even quite 6 foot wide. It's a little bit smaller than that. And 3 foot across, roughly. So, you get quite a bit of yield out of a very, very small area. Now, one thing I will say about the cucumbers, I plant my cantaloupe the same way. I'll show you that cage here in just one second. I spread them out just a little more. I grow 1 plant in each hole instead of 2 because they do get a little bit bigger. Not only that, but I just don't need as much as much cantaloupe, there we go, because cantaloupe, it kind of all comes ripe at the same time, and there's not really a good way to preserve that. These I'm going to be able to make pickles out of, and so I can grow as much cucumber as I want to, make plenty of pickles, and preserve them that way. But cantaloupe, there's not really any good way to preserve cantaloupe. Pretty much just eat it fresh, and there's only so much cantaloupe I can eat at one time, so I don't grow quite as much cantaloupe. But I'll show you those holes here in just a minute. One thing I will say is you want to separate your cucumbers and your melons, whether you're growing cantaloupe or watermelon or whatever. You want to separate them just a little bit. I don't want to grow cantaloupe right next to my cucumbers. They will cross-pollinate, and you'll get some weird cucumbers that just are just kind of crazy, kind of nutty. So it's really best to separate them out just a little bit. Other than that, cucumbers pretty easy to grow. Pick them when they're small, you know, a couple inches long, and small and round if you want pickles. That makes the best pickles. If you let them go too long and they start turning yellow, they're going to get bitter. They're overly ripe at that point. So you want to stay on top of it. Once these things start producing, they really start producing. It's pretty much every day you're coming out and picking cucumbers off of them, or they're going to get away from you. They're going to start getting overly ripe, and when that happens, the plant will shut down. It will stop producing nearly as much. So we'll just watch these as these kind of come along. Let me show you the cantaloupe cage I've got set up over here. All right, this is a smaller cage just because I don't have any more of the tall ones like this. If I had a tall one, I'd use a tall one. But I just do a single cage for these guys. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 holes around it. Again, about 5 inches between each plant. And again, they'll just climb this cage whenever they start to grow. And I'll thin each one out to 1 plant each. I don't grow 2 out of each hole. That's a little bit crowded for cantaloupe. So let's see, other than that, depending on what kind of cantaloupe you're growing, mine are a smaller cantaloupe. They only get about that big, so I probably don't need to worry about it. But if you're growing bigger cantaloupe, they get much, much larger. You may have to support the fruit once it starts growing. The vines will grow up here, your fruit will start hanging off. You may have to take an old piece of t-shirt or something like that, tie it here, and let that fruit kind of sit in it, kind of like a hammock. Hopefully that makes sense. As these things get bigger, I'll come back and I'll shoot additional video on that and show you that. But that'll support the fruit. So if they're pretty good sized cantaloupe, you may end up having to do that. Otherwise, I just grow a smaller cantaloupe and I don't have to worry about it. Whenever they start to get like they're going to fall off the vine, that's the time they're ripe and ready to pick anyway. So works for me. Really pretty simple video here. There's not a whole lot to it. Again, if you don't have rabbit manure, just throw some compost in the hole. Water these things well every single day until they sprout, unless it rains. Let the rain take care of it for you if it does. And you know, follow along this video. This is follow along this channel, I should say. This is part of my Seed to Harvest series. So I'm showing you guys pretty much everything I'm growing in the garden from the time I started from seed all the way up till the harvest. We're going to do this on a continuous basis. So as these things start to grow, we'll come back, we'll shoot additional video on this and keep you updated on it. So if it is your first time gardening, then we'll make sure that you have a great harvest. So stick around to this channel. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, God bless.